We are joined now by Jordan Reid from ESPN, Jordan_Reid on Twitter, R-E-I-D, though, right? Not like the tight end, though, which I know you get a lot. So we're going to talk some draft here with Jordan. Does a great job over at ESPN covering the draft in college football. And I just wanted to get right into it. You put out a tweet last week that I really thought hit the nail on the head about this draft, that the talent, from 4 to 12 in this draft this year is kind of the same. And I feel like this is the struggle right now for Patriots fans as we debate, Will Campbell, Mason Graham, Ted McMillan, whatever, is that you can make arguments for all these guys, and this does feel like a kind of a tough spot in a lot of ways for the Patriots. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, it does. And there's only 3 blue-chip guys in this year's draft class to me, and that's Travis Hunter, Abdul Carter, and Mason Graham. After that, I think things get really sketchy as far as where you could go in this year's draft class. But the one thing or piece of advice, if I was in the draft room with the Patriots this year, is that I don't think they should pigeonhole themselves into drafting particularly one position. Leave your draft board open, and we'll see what they do in free agency. They have a boatload of money. So the best thing for them is attack free agency with an aggressive plan to address, obviously, wide receiver and offensive line, which are the 2 biggest areas of need. So now you go into the draft, especially at the number 4 overall pick, to where now you can leave yourself open to taking any position.
So one thing that perked up for me just now, you said Mason Graham. You think he's a blue-chip player in this draft. I feel like he's maybe one of the more volatile prospects for Patriots fans. What makes you think that he's a blue-chip guy?
It's just the combination of everything that he does at the position. And if you go back and look at every big-time game that Michigan had throughout his career, he was absolutely sensational in all of them. And, he's not going to look as good physically as his counterparts in this year's draft class. But if you turn on the tape, he's the most disruptive of all those guys. I think he's firm as a run defender. He can hold at the point of attack. He can stack and shed if you need him to at the point of attack as a run defender. But also, he got so much better as a pass rusher throughout his career. And you have to remember, this guy hasn't been playing defensive line for very long. When he got to Michigan, he was just really starting his career as a defensive lineman. So I just think the upside that he has, and then just how good he can be 2 to 3 years from now, he's that piece that you can build around at the center of your defense.
Last one at the top, and then I want to pick your brain about some of the depth guys in this class. It does feel like an ideal scenario might be a trade down for the Patriots. But one thing I've been thinking a lot about is, in order to trade down, somebody's got to want to trade up, right?
2 to tango.
Exactly. So do you feel like that 4th pick could have value in a trade down this year? Like, do you see that scenario being plausible?
I think if one of the quarterbacks are there, I think it's a possibility. Now, I think both are going to somehow end up going inside of the top 3, unfortunately for the Patriots. But let's say Cam Ward or Shedeur Sanders slips to that 4th spot. Now you're talking about the Raiders potentially trading up. You're probably not going to give a draft pick to the Jets or quarterback to the Jets. But hypothetically speaking, let's say the Raiders want to come up and acquire the quarterback of the future. I definitely could see a scenario like that playing out if one of those quarterbacks slip.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about wide receivers. That's the other big topic for the Pats right now. As always, it feels like every year we're talking to you about wide receivers. But who are some of the guys? Because I feel like round 1, they've talked so much about trenches. It feels like they're going to probably go offensive or defensive line. Who do you like in round 2 for in general and for New England?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's where the depth of this class really is in that 2nd and 3rd round. You're talking about guys like Jaden Higgins out of Iowa State, Jack Betch out of TCU is one that I like quite a bit. And even into the 4th round, somebody like Ricky White out of UNLV, he's another guy that I like quite a bit. So I think where the depth of this year's class is more so in the 2nd through the 4th round. We don't really have those marquee names or those blue-chip guys like we have seen in years past at the top of the draft, which I think is going to work in the favor of the Patriots because now let's say they take care of the offensive line needs in free agency. Now you can entertain potentially a defensive piece at the top of the draft, and then you could attack receiver in the 2nd or 3rd round.
So you mentioned there Higgins, who I really liked at the Senior Bowl. I think he can play on the outside. But the other guy I wanted to ask you about was Luther Burden, who I feel like some of the mock drafts out there you see recently have him out of the 1st round.
Yeah.
I feel like he's a top 20 talent, but I know there's some other things going on from his season last year. What are you hearing about Luther Burden's stock right now?
Yeah, so he's probably going to go in that 25 to 35 range if I had to guess where he would go right now. And it's just the question marks about what happened last year and then what version of him am I getting. If I'm getting the 2023 version, I'm with you. I think he's a top 20 player all day. But the player we saw last year, he just was not the same for whatever reason. And I know they had some inconsistent play at quarterback, but the explosiveness, the creativity with him, and then just the route running nuance with him. That's the big question marks out there about Luther Burden III.
Yeah. Do you think any of that, some of the antics on the sideline is the best way I can kind of put it about, like, you see that a lot though with receivers and like guys that are, got that little diva alpha in them, and
they
like
just want the ball,
they just want the ball, right? And I feel like we make a big deal out of that sometimes. Happens. Obviously Odell used to do it all the time. DK Metcalf can get pretty fiery.
Yep.
Does that weigh on you at all when it comes to grading these prospects, that kind of stuff?
Not really. If anything, I take it as a positive because it shows that they care and they want the ball. You want guys that want the ball or want to be in that moment, as long as it's not over the top, like, them throwing stuff or slamming their helmet or anything like that. As long as the antics aren't over the top, I'm completely fine with it, just because it shows that they want the ball, which is what you want in a receiver.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's go back to tackle. Anybody on day 2, early day 3 that you feel like might have starter potential if they do have to pass on it at the top?
So there's 3 guys for me that I think eventually have starter potential, and the first one I'll say is Jonas Savanea.
Yeah,
the
big boy.
Guard/tackle out of Arizona. He's primarily played right tackle during his career, but he does have some reps, or some games I should say, at guard. I think he's a guard on the next level. I like his tape better, and I thought he looked more comfortable there at the Senior Bowl too. Another is Emory Jones, the offensive tackle/guard out of LSU, who's played 3 games at right guard, and that's where I think his home is going to be on the next level, just because he has some balance issues when he's out on the island. So he's one. And then the last one, who's getting quite a bit of buzz now, that I think could go in round 2, is Charles Grant out of William & Mary. He's a bit of a project, but the athleticism that he plays with, I don't think we have a tackle that's as athletic as him.
Yeah.
He does need to gain some weight, but you talk about somebody that has a really nice foundation to build upon. I just think he fits perfectly with the Patriots timeline, especially just because they have some room to grow. They can afford to take a project like a Charles Grant, potentially put him on either side, right or left tackle.
I'm glad you mentioned Emory Jones, because when I look at those guys on day 2, potentially early day 3, I love upside, right? And like, even though he had a little bit of a down year last year, it felt like at times maybe there's some questions about him playing tackle or not at the next level. The tape 2 years ago is really, really good, and there were times where I felt like it was good still last year. And if I'm going to take a chance on one of those guys, it's like LSU tackle, high recruit, like that. I mean, it's hard to pass up on somebody like that.
Well, one thing I will say about Emory, and just watching him at the Senior Bowl, is that he wants to dominate whoever is in front of him.
Yeah.
And I think at the root of his issue is just control.
Yeah.
And I've always said that I would always love to coach or have an offensive lineman on my roster that I have to tone down their physicality, as opposed to one that you're trying to coach physicality into them.
Sure.
So with Emory, I just think it's a matter of control, and I think his balance will get better over time when you do slide him inside. But just the physicality that he plays with, he's a guy I would love to have on my roster.
Okay, 2 more for you. Everybody in this draft has a running back and a tight end they like, right? Like, you can pick from that group. Who's your running back and who's your tight end?
Yeah, so I'll give you 2 for running backs, and the first one is Devin Neal out of Kansas.
I loved him
I'm
in
a big
Mobile.
Devin Neal fan. So I called their game when they went against Illinois this year, which is one of his better games of the year. He's going to come in at about 5'11", 220 pounds, has that rocked-up build. He reminds me a lot of Kareem Hunt when he was coming out of Toledo. Just the contact balance, the vision, the receiving upside that he has, I think he's going to be great. And then one of my later round sleepers that I like quite a bit is Brashard Smith out of SMU, who actually originally was a receiver at Miami prior to this year, transitions over to SMU and transitioned to running back in the same time. So he reminds me a lot of Tyrone Tracy.
Yeah.
And we saw what he was able to do last year with the New York Giants. And then a tight end that I absolutely love is Elijah Arroyo out of Miami. Was finally able to stay healthy this year, only 21 years old. A bit of that F tight end that you really want to flex out predominantly. You don't want him taking a whole bunch of inline snaps. That's just not where his neighborhood is going to be. But you talk about somebody that has tremendous upside at the position. I'm a big Arroyo fan.
I like that. I like those 2. Those are 2 big Senior Bowl guys. Okay, very last one for you, then we're going to let you go. Travis Hunter, wide receiver or cornerback? Both.
He's rare. I mean, I've said it everywhere I've been. He's my top player in the draft, and he reminds me so much of Champ Bailey. He was coming out of Georgia in the late 90s. Champ actually averaged over 100 snaps when he was coming out of the draft as well. He's wearing a gold jacket now. But I would play him at corner predominantly, and then I would sprinkle in about 20 to 25 plays a game with him as a wide receiver just because I think he's so special.
Yeah, it does. It feels difficult to do it the other way around.
Yeah.
And I think that's the struggle.
Troy Brown is really the only player that I can think of that's been like that.
Well, he's Jordan Reid from ESPN. Give him a follow if you don't already. And Jordan, thanks for your time. Appreciate it.
As always.